Hello and welcome to our Leading Local webinar on artificial intelligence and local government. We're going to give everyone a second to just get started and logged in, and we'll begin in just a moment. Excellent. Well, I am so excited to have you join us today for this webinar on artificial intelligence and local government. My name is Erica Manuel, and I'm the CEO and Executive Director of ILG, or the Institute for Local Government. I really wanted to cover this topic of artificial intelligence for a few months now. And if you're like me, maybe your news and your social media feeds are just brimming with information about new apps and new technology and new cutting edge services that are promising to really change our worlds. I think when I think about this as sort of a time-strapped individual, I'm absolutely intrigued by the promises of like time saved and money earned and all the great things that it's promising. But as a policy and government enthusiast, I have some questions. So today our conversation is going to be with an AI expert named John Robichaux. He's going to answer certainly some of my burning questions and hopefully yours as well. But first, let's do this quick tech overview. As you may have noticed when you logged in, you were placed on mute, and you will be on mute for the duration of this webinar event. We're asking that you please type any content questions related to artificial intelligence and what our panelist is discussing into that Q&A box, and you can do that anytime during the session. But if you have any logistical questions or technical issues, the chat function is working and it'll go directly to the panelists and the host, and we can try and troubleshoot any issues you might have from a technical standpoint. And as you may have also noticed, and as is pretty typical, we love to record these sessions because it's so important to be able to share this information as broadly as we can with our local government practitioners. And so we will be recording today's session, and that recording will be available to you all on our website and be emailed out as well. So next slide, please. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the Institute for Local Government in case you're not aware. If you've never joined us before and this is maybe your first session with us, we like to give you a little bit of a primer on who ILG is and why we're bringing this session to you. It's always important for us to kind of connect those dots. As I mentioned, I'm Erica. I'm the CEO and Executive Director of ILG. Behind the screen here, I'm joined by a colleague, Seth Yund, who is assisting me with this great topic. And really, when you think about ILG, we are a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization that's absolutely focused on just helping local government do the work that it does on the ground. We are really, really blessed and grateful to be affiliated with 3 statewide associations. That's the League of California Cities, the California Special Districts Association, and CSAC, which is the county's organization. And they represent over 2,500 local governments in the state of California. And those are our people as well. It's the leaders at the elected level, at the staff level, anyone working in and around local government. Those are the people that we work and support to serve. We really aim to provide practical, easy to use resources. And that could be education, that could be training, that could be tools, so that your agencies can effectively deliver and implement things on the ground. Our affiliates handle advocacy. They're in the Capitol, they're in DC, really making sure that legislation is passed in your favor. For us, we work with what happens after that. We work with how you manage things and implement things on the ground when the rubber hits the road. Next slide. There are a couple things we do in ILG's programs and services wheelhouse, and this topic actually covers quite a few of them. Our big 4 pillars are leadership and governance, civics education and workforce development, public engagement, and sustainable and resilient communities, which is a large umbrella for everything from housing to climate. And we really do try to aim to take those 4 pillars and think about how local governments at the city, county, and special district level can refine, improve, and do best with their services. And we offer education and training, sometimes technical assistance if you need it, capacity building to kind of grow your team, and then convening, because sometimes the conversations we need to have about these issues are just as important. So one of the things that really hones in on what ILG does is that we really are all about leaning into capacity building, leaning into building trust, and navigating complexity. And when I think about artificial intelligence, all of those things absolutely resonate with me when I think about what we have to deal with now with this sort of new idea, a new concept that's actually not that new. Apparently, it's been around for a little while, and we're going to hear about that. But I know, as I mentioned, I had questions. I wanted to understand not only how it would impact me personally, but how would it impact local governments from a regulation side, and maybe even from an implementation side, when you think about the opportunities to utilize some of these technologies in your agencies to maybe improve your processes or speed up increase your capacity and speed up some of the work that you have to do, which, as we know, is ever growing and always changing. So what are we going to do today? On our agenda for this conversation, we're going to do a quick poll just to kick us off. And we want to baseline the conversation by understanding a little bit about who's in the virtual room, what your level of sophistication and awareness is already, and what level of questions we might get today. We always want to be prepared and make sure we tailor our content to be as relevant for you as we can. And then we're going to go into an overview of AI, and we're going to talk about a couple key things, like the very basics, which is what literally one of the first things I asked is, tell me what it is exactly. I mean, I just wanted to understand the basics of it. And then we're going to go into some types and examples. We're going to talk about some opportunities and some potential threats and risks we should consider. What are the applications for local governments and government in general? Because it does go beyond city, county, special districts. Certainly, there have been conversations about this at the global level, the federal level. How do we manage this from a regulation standpoint and an application standpoint? And then what are some resources that you can start to glean to understand this better and think about how it's going to apply potentially to your professional worlds or even your personal lives? As I mentioned, we are going to make time for a Q&A. Many of you were gracious enough to put in questions when you registered that identified some of the things that you really wanted to ask about. And so we're going to do our absolute best to get to as many of those as we can during the conversation today. And our goal is to make sure that we kind of give you this primer, to kind of give you an overview, maybe not a full deep dive on everything artificial intelligence, but at least something to get you started and to get you thinking, and hopefully to get you moving in the right direction for your local agency. And then we're going to wrap up before noon. Without further ado, we will go ahead and launch a quick poll about you. We would love for you to use the Zoom icons that have just popped up. It should have a window that popped up that tells us just a little bit about you, what type of organization you represent. We'd love to first know what jurisdiction type you're with or what organization type you're with. We would love to hear a little bit more about that so that we might be able to tailor some of the examples that we give you as well. If you are calling in today, you may not be able to do that Zoom. So we do appreciate those of you that are on your computers or on your phones that should be getting those poll questions. So we've so far got three questions that you should be able to see: what type of organization you represent, how much you already know about artificial intelligence, and whether your jurisdiction is already using artificial intelligence in some capacity. We would love to understand kind of where you are in this continuum without any judgment, just so that we can baseline for our conversation. All right, we're doing pretty good. We're going to close that poll in just a few moments. Last questions in there, go ahead and add. All right. Let's end that poll and let's see the results. All right, it looks like we've got, as is normally the case, that 48% of you are from cities, 21% of you are from counties, 13% are from special district, and then there's that elusive 17% other. Love that too. We're glad to have you from all different backgrounds. We just want to make sure we tailor our conversation. How much do you already know about AI? Nothing at all. The 8%ers. Hey, I was one of those 8%ers. So definitely happy to have you on the line a little bit. I feel like I'm kind of there now. So 67% of you are right where I might be right now. And then a fair amount, the 21%, and then the 4% who are a lot. We are going to maybe crowdsource some information today. We're grateful to have you on the line as well. And then if your jurisdiction is already using AI in some capacity, we have 25% saying yes. And that is really exciting. We'd love to hear in the chat how that's happening. We would love to talk about it. And we'd love to know a little bit more and profile those. For those that are no, I think that's probably the majority for right now. Many jurisdictions have questions and as they should. And so that's pretty typical. 40% of you say no. And about 35% of you say not sure. And then there's that 1% that's like, well, it doesn't really apply to me. And that's okay too. All right, well, thank you all for sharing that information. And we will dive right into our conversation next. So I am so excited to have today's speaker on the line. I was introduced from another colleague who said, hey, I heard you were interested in doing something on artificial intelligence, and I know a guy. And I want to definitely give a shout out to that person who connected John Robichaux and I. John was at Stanford at the time, and he kind of just gave me this amazing overview of kind of the work he's been doing and how it applies. And I told him what I wanted to do. I told him the kind of information that I wanted to bring. The Leading Local series in particular is really focused on issues that are cutting edge, that are emerging, that are difficult, that are challenging, that are a little bit sticky. And it seemed really perfect to be able to bring John in because he has over 25 years of experience working on issues tied to government, industry, and civil society, and 15 years working on AI. He has taught at Harvard and Stanford, so not super smart, but we're going to let that slide. And then most recently, he led the government and executive education programs for Stanford's flagship institute for human-centered AI, HAI, which is offering programs for officials in over 40 countries and all 50 United States. So he's been doing this in a lot of spaces for a really long time, and we're really lucky to have him. He happens to be based in California, which we absolutely love too, and I can't knock it. Stanford is my alma mater, so I love that he's a Cardinal as well. So with that, and without further ado, let's join John Robichaux to the virtual stage and have him begin and just give us a download on what is this crazy thing called AI. John, welcome.
Good. Thanks so much, Erica, for the generous introduction, and thanks everybody for your attendance and interest in this topic. Clearly, AI, my feeds like Erica are full of AI-related topics day in and day out. But here with you all, your work is so important to all of us who live here in California, who are citizens, who really rely on the services and the work that you do day in and day out. So first of all, thank you for your service, and secondly, looking forward then to the conversation today, you with Erica, and then with those of you in the room through the Q&A. I wanted to begin today with a little bit of level setting for those, given the mix of folks in the room. And maybe begin with that first question that Erica asked me. Hey, help me understand the difference between traditional coding, traditional algorithms, and AI and machine learning. And then from there, I'll do some deeper dives related to topics that are of particular interest for local governments as well. And a couple of ways of thinking about the field that I hope will help you organize your thinking as you go about your work and talk with your teams and your constituents along the way as well. So okay, next slide. So traditional coding versus AI. Firstly, traditional coding has done an incredible amount of service for us over the decades. Got us to the moon, to space, done enormously powerful work already. So what's the problem, and what's the problem with it, or limitations of traditional coding and algorithms, and what's this new thing AI? Why is it really exciting and different? Firstly, let me just say there are many ways you could shape this, but a couple of things that I like to frame around, a couple pieces I like to frame around, is the difference in certainty versus uncertainty. So for traditional coding, that's really great for well-known contexts, and traditional coding is often built around a rule set. If this happens, then do this, et cetera, et cetera. There are some exceptions along the way, of course, but that's a basic sort of setup. AI, on the other hand, is really something like a probability or statistical exercise, which is a great tool in situations of uncertainty. And the technologies have developed in such a way over the many decades, as Erica rightly points out, where the models can learn and adapt. Of course, that's one of the great benefits of AI. One of the things, core characteristics we often think about. But it's to meet some given objective, and that objective set is a piece that for leaders, I always point out, is the most important, because for us who are leading organizations, leading teams, solving problems in the real world, one of the core messages when thinking about AI, whether it's good for your team or good for your problem set that you're looking at, is to always remember we're looking to solve the problem. So AI is a tool. It's not always going to be the best solution as well. So watch for that objective and that problem set as a key feature that I'll talk about. Some differences in the workloads and the resources required up front. So in traditional coding, you might have a huge number of coders, human work, putting in lines of code. AI, the real resource there, especially if you're building a model, which many of us won't be, but we'll be relying on companies to do, requires an enormous amount of time and dollars and compute power. So the resource allocation is different, but can also involve a fair amount of resources up front. And then, in terms of AI, sort of one of its great features is being able to identify, certainly around data sets, of which governments have an enormous amount, of course. AI is great at also identifying connections or causations or relationships that humans just aren't able, either in our individual capacity or as groups, to make, because an AI can run iterations that look at billions of examples, or can simulate millions of years, far more than we could individually or collectively, and in many ways, really, in that way, because the adaptation piece, the learning piece of the algorithms outstrip what traditional code and algorithms can do. So again, other ways you could shape this, or you could describe this, but I wanted to at least identify questions of uncertainty, questions of the resource differences up front, and then some places where AI is often thought of as outstripping traditional coding or algorithms as well, and why it's a nice next phase for us. Okay, next slide, please. Here again, different ways you could cut and slice the field. If I were doing this for an academic audience, this would have probably 10 different types of disciplines or areas of AI on it. But there are really 4 that I want to mention here for those of us in local government who are thinking about big picture questions. Natural language processing is one area of AI that's getting a lot of attention right now. This is where AI researchers are working on text, on speech, on not just, this is your Alexa, this is your Siri, this is your chat bot that you see. The technologies behind that are built on natural language processing, your translation apps, etc. And I want to note that, in addition to those sort of examples there, that this field also is trying to tackle questions of vernacular or slang and not merely formal language. So that, one of its sort of cutting edge areas right now is to go beyond standard language representations and really look at indigenous or subcultures, racial ethnic groups, which often will have different types of slang or vernacular in their day. And so how to represent that both in text and in voice. So a really huge area right now.
And is that, just
Erica,
to clarify, that's like a ChatGPT would be in natural language processing, and Jasper and some of those guys?
Exactly. So
Okay.
exactly. So in the news today, the ChatGPT would be the great example of a large language model built on natural language processing technologies. The other big one that many of us will be familiar with will be computer vision. So computer vision is everything from a satellite to this camera that we're all working on Zoom, to every camera that's sitting on our smartphones today. It's the technology that helps you select on an object today. This has all come out in the past couple of years, right? Select on an object or a person today in a photo and pull that out. The technology that says, hey, look, this is the photo I've never seen before. This is a video I've never seen before. And I would like to identify what's the difference between this bridge behind John and John himself in this moment. that previously was not possible and is today made possible through the technologies that build computer vision. So we see this again in our day-to-day, but it's extraordinarily important in things like sensors, beyond things like cameras and pictures that we're used to seeing. So you'll hear me talk about satellite readings around wildfires and moisture content. That's really important for those of us here in California and elsewhere around the world, but that we're really watching to see where things like satellites or drone readings can help measure moisture levels. And a lot of that is enabled by the sensor technologies built on computer vision technologies. Those are huge. I want to pause right here, and I just want to say that if you think about the data sets that are available today versus 20 years ago, these are the two areas where we see the most advancements because the internet exists. Because today, you know from ChatGPT and those large language models that what they've done is they've gone and read the entire internet. You'll often hear people say, because of that open source. Computer vision, all the images that are on the internet, the videos can be read now and analyzed in such a way that wasn't possible 20 years ago. Those open data sets just weren't available. So today what we're seeing is huge advances in those two arenas in particular. Okay, robotics. Robotics, some of this you'll know from manufacturing, et cetera. There'll be other versions of it, exoskeletons, so like versions of the Iron Man suit to maybe help somebody who's having mobility trouble walk better, or again, in military case, like an Iron Man suit, et cetera. That's a field that we often separate in the world because not just because of the manufacturing applications, but also the combo of technologies. I want to flag it for you all to recognize that there are some places where robotics is really has really done well, is doing well in the AI space, optimization, safety, et cetera, around specific tasks. But a more generalized approach for robotics is actually a harder thing to achieve right now because they don't have the data sets like we do in computer vision or language that I just described around the internet and so on. So their data sets have to involve things like how much pressure to put on human skin if you're helping somebody get dressed in the morning. How much pressure can you put on a leg if somebody's about to fall and you want to help them stand more stably? Those require models and simulations that just aren't on the scale that the other two have. So it's of a different kind right now, but one that we're all thinking about. And I think many of you will recognize either from film or from, again, from manufacturing. Exactly. The fourth one is expert systems. So this is a constellation of fields, which is really looking for ways in which AI can help decision makers. I think of it as decision support. So for those of us in leadership and those of you in government, I think of expert systems as a really important field for you to be watching beyond what's hitting the headlines in natural language processing and computer vision and the like, and then what you might be thinking about in terms of robotics, because a lot of times that's not flashy. A lot of times that just happens on a laptop or in compute powers. And so it might be in a spreadsheet, it might be in some output, it might be in a designed user interface. It might help you do something like determine a better system of when to assign your mechanics to update your fleet of cars, because that can save us millions and billions of dollars, and an AI system designed to assess the needs of mechanical devices and when they're likely to break down and when repairs are most optimal. That can be done through a tailored expert system, and again can save us billions and millions of dollars, huge resource savings as well. But those are often tailored to specific problems. We may get to a point in the future where we can have a more generalized approach to expert systems, and I'll say a word about that on the next slide. But I want to flag that as one place where it's not as flashy because it ends up on a laptop a lot of times, A. B, it's a place today where there's a lot of opportunity for local governments. And then also thirdly, to say that there's a place here for further growth and more generalization, but currently it's a little bit more narrow in its focus. So on the next slide, what I want to do is I want to give a second sort of way to divide the field here. So let's go to that next slide, please, Seth. Great. So Another way you could slice the field is not around the technologies, but really around the more narrow specific uses versus the more wider applications or foundational ways that AI is being built today. And the right-hand column, foundation models, I want to say, is something that 3 years ago, 5 years ago, we weren't talking about in the same way we are today. So, but this narrow AI on the left-hand column is the type of AI, is this constellation of AI technologies that's been around for 20, 30 years in some way, shape, or form. Narrow AI. So what do I mean when I talk about the difference between narrow AI versus foundation models if I'm looking at the big AI picture? Narrow AI, they sound a lot like those expert systems I just described, right? They're narrow, they're tailored towards specific use cases. They can be hyper optimized, really important for those of us in government, to what's our particular problem, what do our unique data sets allow us to see in ways that ChatGPT just isn't going to see because they're not as hyper focused or hyper optimized towards our problem set. They can be extraordinarily safe. So anybody who's flown on a commercial airplane in anywhere in the world for past many years is on a plane that has an AI system helping avoid mid-air collisions. The mid-air collision avoidance system on all commercial airplanes globally is one of these narrow AI systems, and it is far safer than the previous old algorithm traditional coding model. And just to give you an idea of the difference here, and this speaks back to the difference between traditional coding and AI as well, but it's a good use case. The old code for mid-air collision avoidance systems was something like 1,500 pages worth of code. The AI version of it can be 500. Right, so you're dramatically cutting the level of code. When I flagged earlier that the upfront human coding costs go down dramatically when you move from traditional coding to AI, that's one example. Another researcher who speaks on this topic points out that the difference can be the difference between 500,000 lines of code, 500,000 lines of code versus 500 lines of code. So an AI, again, saving you on resources, can tackle specific problems, can be hyper optimized and far safer in many examples. Erica.
I also appreciate, though, that it's been around for a while. And
Yeah.
I think there's this misconception that it's this new thing and that it's, oh, we should be so afraid of it. And it's already infused a little bit secretly into our world. And many people, I don't think, realized it.
Exactly right. Exactly right. So, if in November 2022, if we're going to take the idea that that's when there was this virality that occurred around ChatGPT and DALL-E and Stable Diffusion, these large language and visual models that I'll talk about here a little bit more, and the technology behind those in a second. If that's what's getting the public's attention, what this slide is really wanting all of us to do is remember that this narrow AI has been around for a while, that there's really great use cases for it, that it can be super safe, super optimized, really ideal for government in many ways, and that it's not as new or as problematic as some of the more emergent technologies, the large language models, the foundation models, et cetera, that I'll talk about. So that's exactly right on this one. Good. And so you see that second to last bullet on the narrow AI. Hey, look, that's not getting a lot of media attention right now, right? It's not splashy that right. Suddenly today, right, you can, identify when to fix your fleet better, or, it teaches you where to drill, where a better way to drill your drill holes if you're doing mining in a particular parcel of land that would be more likely to find whatever mineral or object you're seeking in the mining there. Those are the types of narrow use cases that are extraordinarily successful, is what I want to say. And last bullet there, you'll see, is often within reach of many organizations, including governments, because they're more tailored, because they don't require the enormous compute power or the enormous data sets that something like ChatGPT or the things in the news require today. And so I really want, and you'll hear me say in my summary here, this is a space that if I'm telling local governments where to pay attention to AI today, this is a place where you could probably act safely and responsibly today.
And would you say, because local governments are not known for, I would say, bleeding edge technology, even cutting edge technology.
Yeah.
And also the speed of adoption, not super quick. Would you say that it's cost effective yet? And maybe we'll talk about that later.
Yeah, there are many cases where it will be cost effective, many where there aren't, right? But if you're talking about the difference between, and we'll talk, I'll give a couple of examples here that can reduce, say, like an adjudication example I'll give, which was tailored around a narrow AI example in partnership with a university, was able to reduce the time to adjudicate a case, in this case in the federal VA system, from something, by factors of many months.
Yeah.
So from multiple years to just a few months. Well, that's time, resources, and that's better services for your agency, and able to do a little bit more within budget, when you're thinking about the trade-off between all the personnel costs associated with those longer lag times, et cetera.
And the value proposition too. I mean, you gave the example of airlines, and it's like, well, what is the cost of a collision, right? What is the cost of a horrible accident that threatens lives? Absolutely. And when we think about things even on the ground, like you said, disaster preparedness, resiliency, some very tangible impact areas, definitely something we will talk more about.
Yep, good. Okay, so what's this stuff in the news then? Okay, foundation models, this right column. So as I said, about 5 years ago, there were only a few of us who were, sort of the AI technologists on the inside, are really thinking about these large models, and they were interesting. They were developing in ways that we were excited about, et cetera. But they hadn't yet made large impact. B, hadn't become a permanent feature in the public's mind, and C, also hadn't really demonstrated the abilities that we would want out of a really robust AI system. So they were on track, but not wowing us just yet in the ways that today in mid 2023 we're pretty impressed. So okay, foundation models. I give you at the end in the resources slide here a reference for Economist cover page article on foundation models from last year, which does a great job explaining this if you want to read more. But in short, these are the models that use immense amount of data to build wide models that in theory will serve as a foundation for specific tasks. So ChatGPT is the one we're often talking about today. There are others, by the way, that are already better. And on the visual or the image generation side, things like DALL-E and Stable Diffusion, and again, those continue to evolve and get better, and other models are being released into the public. These are the ones that you see in the news today. They're, again, the example I gave earlier, reading most of the internet, is the lay version of how they get built. And the idea is that once you have a model like ChatGPT that can do a fairly good job of speaking as if it were another person, then you can start to fine-tune it so it can serve as a foundation for fine-tuning or honing the technology to a specific use. Take that basic foundation model and then fine-tune it towards search. Google and Bing are all over that right now, right? Fine-tune it towards legalese so that it does a better job than some of those AI failures we're seeing in the news articles this week, so that it can really help lawyers and replace paralegals and do things like that along the way. Fine-tune it towards math education. So early versions of ChatGPT were not great with some of the math formulas or explanations. And so fine tune it so that it does better in that world. And then, at the other end, what you have is a company that's built sort of a base model and these fine tunings that give us a huge range of products that are better and less prone to errors than they are today and out of the box. Problems. Firstly, globally speaking, and this is globally speaking, this type of technology is really only available to just a handful of companies globally. The cost and the time involved are enormous. We know the US versions, there are Chinese versions out there, et cetera. So, in terms of thinking about both the opportunities, that's great that we have these models that can that are advancing in ways that are going to be really helpful to us. But governments, internationally, federally, and locally, we need to be thinking about that's a real shift in terms of what cutting edge technologies are available anyway globally, sometimes all governments are locked out because they're locked into proprietary government company needs. And then there's specific, of course, interests that companies have on the profit-making side that may not, or may leave behind some of the public service interests that we might have, or that, you know, we could see on the government side. So the companies are thinking about this. We're thinking about this with them. We're working with government officials to think about this. So in the US, one of the things that we did out of Stanford was promote a national research cloud, or a national sort of base where cutting edge AI technologies, both for learning and research purposes, could be available to the public sector in a way that it's not necessarily currently. Even top universities don't have access to some of these foundation models early on today. Okay, so these indeed look like they're going to have enormous impact. ChatGPT is already the most, widely adopted application in human history, and it's only been released, now for less than a year. And we should expect that down the road, some of the problems we're seeing today in terms of errors, in terms of hallucinations, are going to get refined and improved. So that's the big set. Finally, for governments, I want to note this last bullet: emergent properties. AIs, sometimes we want, so the learning and adapting is obviously one of the big pieces of AIs. Foundation models are interesting in that, or have one of the ways in which they're interesting is that because the basic task was to go out and learn how to develop speech in large language models, computer vision, identify objects, and do some other things. That's the basic objective set. Remember, objectives are important. But what we find is these sets are large enough that they actually learn other things along the way. And so when we talk about emergent properties within AI, these are sort of the surprise learnings that the model has picked up along the way. And that is a world in which foundation models can be scary to those of us in government in terms of risk analysis, in terms of worries. What did you learn that we don't know about, et cetera? So a lot of times what the research around foundation models is having to do is to probe the model or the chat bot and figure out, okay, what can you tell us that you weren't taught to go learn to do? And so this becomes an interesting question set for where these technologies may have their limits in terms of where we would want to use them. So I want to flag that as a big piece here too. Okay, Erica, you unmuted there.
No, I was just echoing what you're saying, that I think a lot of the uncertainty that we're experiencing and across all sectors, but in government in particular, is like, we don't know where this is going. We don't know how it's evolving, right? That question of evolution of technology is really, especially when it is uncontrolled evolution, right? You've taught it to teach itself.
Exactly right. And so, this is in some ways, this is the moment that we're living through today that a year ago we weren't living through. A lot of these companies are actually holding back releasing their foundation models. So August 22, I'm doing a boot camp for the U.S. Congress, and Google's in the room and saying, we have this model that we're probing, we're learning to see what it learned, where it's evolving, but we're not releasing it. And one of the staffers said to me in passing, why would you be a company and not release something? That's just ridiculous. They couldn't understand it. And that's why, right? That Google understood at the time that, hey, look, you start to release these things in the wild, you've got emergent properties out there. You don't know exactly what's going to happen. I think the moment we're living through post ChatGPT's release and the virality that's come around that, and the gold rush that's really been set off from that, is that some of those guardrails that the companies had a year ago have, let's just say, maybe the barrier's been reduced releasing them into the world. And so we're seeing a little bit more, because the models are being released now so quickly, because everybody wants to get ahead and not miss out on this moment of public attention, of investment and the like. We're worried that some of the guardrails are being reduced today that were up last year.
And I guess as government, we have to learn to move at the speed of life and not necessarily speed of potentially our policymaking processes, which are not necessarily quick. So this is really helpful.
Okay, great. Seth, next slide here. So I think I want to say word about big picture, and then I'm going to go into some local government use cases, some examples that may be helpful here to illuminate how you might think about it, or ways in which we see AI potentially, currently and potentially working within local government. So firstly, let's just say that, the big picture here is that there's an extraordinary amount of opportunities. There's going to be a great amount of good that comes from these technologies. My line on this is this first bullet. I think everybody's thinking about, computers and what they can do, and the models and what they can do. My core message is that really what we ought to expect is that we're unleashing a really powerful age of human creativity. That's for good and for ill. So, what AI is going to be able to do, and already can do, is really unlock a lot of opportunities and reduce barriers to folks engaging in creative activities of all kinds. Creative for work product and outcomes, creative for arts and wellness, creative in variety for harm, right? The ill side of things here. But when you start talking about AIs that can write their own code, so I just tell it, give me a 5-minute video on, Erica and John talking about AI in local government, and it takes 30 seconds to spit out a 5-minute video that looks really real, right? On the one hand, that can be really beneficial. That could, be if you review it and the content looks strong, that's a huge amount of time and planning saved, etc. That could be used for good or ill, right? Art, huge advances. I have ideas about how to create art, things that are music, a new script for Hollywood, but I'm not great with paints, or I'm not great with Photoshop. Suddenly I can describe it in a DALL-E or Stable Diffusion or whatever the next version is. I'm going to be able to create art in a way, my daughter's going to be able to create art in a way that we just weren't able to before. That type of unleashing of ideas into realities, again, you can see has some really extraordinarily positive potentials, and some really dangerous ones as well. But it's human creativity that I think is really lost sometimes when we think so much on the technology. Yeah.
Well, you're absolutely right. And I mean, I'm not artistic in the sort of painting in that kind of way. And I would love to be able to just deliver something amazing. So I didn't think about it in that context. But then the flip side of it is an example like that we just got in our Q&A, which is like, what about, let's say there's that wonderful video that's just been posted of an elected official, and they're advocating for something that they did not advocate for, right? And that that has now gone viral, and has the potential, certainly in our cancel culture world, to ruin someone, right? How do you dispel some of these? How do you tell when something's real or not real, or generated by AI or not? And that's something that we need to either think about. Well, obviously we think about it, but how do we plan for that, mitigate for that? I don't know.
Yeah, this is a great problem. This is a great question. So first of all, this is a reality that some folks in our world have been talking about for a while. Hey, look, the problem of deepfakes, the post-truth world. We've talked about that in U.S. converse, in a U.S. political context of in one type recently, but I think the technology is going to open up exactly this. And what you'll see, one of my concerns for local governments that I flag in a later slide, is exactly this: that not only are we in this world where potential deep fakes is often the language, right, or misinformation is put out there, AI will exponentially increase the possibilities there, lower the bar to entry for that, but also put that together with our local news desert problem and the decimation of local news who can fact check a potential harmful deep fake that's out there. Boy, I'm really worried about local governments in a way, and local government officials in a way that, at the federal level, the Times will investigate the senator who gets the bad video, right? The Post will tell us that the Pope in the Parka is not real, right? to pick a recent example in the news. But where are you going to see that at the local level? So I think for local governments, this is an enormous concern, A. And B, what you're seeing today are potential legislation where you need to watermark a deep fake, et cetera. But look, the technologists are working on ways to ensure that a bad actor, doesn't get around that. But that's going to be the cat and mouse game probably for some time.
Yeah, and I know we're going to talk about this a little bit later, but as we think about the changing business models for not just local governments, but businesses in general, you mentioned the organizations, their staff is decimated. They're
Yeah,
not going to have people doing the fact checking, right? And in many ways, we can see that there will be jobs replaced by this.
yeah,
We're going to have to certainly talk about that, and I know
yeah,
it's on the list of things.
yeah. Yeah, good. Yeah, there's a lot to say on the jobs front, and I know it's of particular concern to local officials too. So I'm excited to talk about that. So, okay, on this slide, I identify a number of other things, places where we're likely to see huge advances thanks to AI. Medicine. Look, 2022 is going to be remembered for ChatGPT and the virality of foundation models. 2021, though, in my view, may end up being the more important historic year in AI, because that's the year that that in medicine, the folding of proteins, a 50-year problem that was thought to be practically unsolvable within medicine, was solved by an AI system. And that's unleashing this enormous set of opportunities around pharmaceuticals, around medicine, around personalized medicine, and all kinds of health related benefits that we're likely to see. And I think so mark that. Education, there's personalized tutors a lot of people think about, but there's also helping teachers in the classroom by understanding, are they speaking to students differently if they're of a different race or ethnicity or gender, right? So help reduce bias in the classroom, help students maybe pick curricular tracks that track better to where they want to end up, either financially or career wise, et cetera. A lot of opportunities in education, help education systems run better, more efficiently as well. Science, history, art, et cetera. And then all the dark sides are going to continue to exist that you hear about: error, bias, failure of human oversight. So if we give too much power in critical areas to AI technologies, this is what we often hear again in the headlines, people worrying about AI. Don't give AI full control of your power grid. That would be dumb, right? But somebody in the world is going to do that. And somebody in the world is going to fail to ensure to have proper human oversight. And it's going to feel like a reasonable choice at the moment. Hard budget choices, hard trade-offs, et cetera. We need to be careful about that. And for local governments, I'm particularly concerned because of the resource constraints in that world too. Also, on the flip side, there's too much trust we're going to give in that. There's bad counsel you'll get from salespeople and others who are trying to sell you on something. And then I've already flagged this, that I'm particularly concerned that the public service technology and the ways in which these technologies can really do good in the public sector are going to be falling behind the for-profits. We experience that in many ways already, but for a technology like AI that's going to be so pervasive, that's already so pervasive, and then going to continue to be rolled out in key areas, I think that's a problem that I'd like to see us solve, even at the federal, state level, if at all possible. Where are we going to ensure that local governments have access to responsible, safe, and effective AIs in a way that isn't going to lead us down some of these more dark paths?
Well, it ends up being about how do we continue to deliver the services? They're critical
Yeah,
services at the local level. And if this is the technology that's needed to do that, how do we make sure that we get it? And
yeah.
certainly there has to be some kind of conversation and potential policy made at various levels to make sure that we're not left out of that picture.
Exactly. Good. Okay. Next slide, Seth. What I want to do is I want to actually piggybacking right on Erica's comment here. Erica, your comment here. I want to just give some examples, right, of ways in which we see AI technologies today either being used, or ways in which it's likely to be more and more important in the coming years. This is clearly not an exhaustive list, but I wanted to give an idea of some of the differences or various ways in which AI can help us. So firstly, I flagged already sort of wildfire planning. So sensor data from drones, from satellites can help us around hydration. I think, we were talking at Stanford with Cal Fire about ways to implement a similar system here so that you can pre-deploy some fire relief teams, resources along the way, where you most likely to get burn, where's the burn most likely to end up, et cetera, et cetera. I give an example in the resources section 2 of a project that Santa Clara County engaged in during COVID, where they, for contact tracing purposes, needed to quickly, as we all did, be in contact with somebody who's tested positive for COVID, and get them interviewed for purposes of the tracing and contact, and then getting word out, and then deploying the various public health needs that we have there. Using an AI system to better match primary language capabilities with a limited pool of interpreters, Santa Clara County, with help from one of the Stanford labs, was able to reduce contract tracing case closing by 14 hours. Now, I don't know, when you're talking about hundreds of cases being closed 14 hours early, that's a huge amount in a public emergency, much less the regular staffing time, et cetera. So I give you some resources there to give you an idea of what was possible. Also, they give some good examples of what they would recommend for local governments thinking about working with an AI that might be more narrow like this. AI is helping right now, and again, in the resources, I give you a couple of examples, leads on flood mitigation for reservoir fill up, but then dam release to make sure that we're not using algorithms written in the 1970s that are actually generating more local flooding than we need, and all the problems, Erica, damage control, risk mitigation, the resources that can be saved there. Predictive analytics, you'll see a lot of examples of this right now: energy usage, traffic patterns, AI being deployed to help cities sort of on those areas. I mentioned the adjudication process at the federal level. You can imagine a number of places in city and county courts where you can reduce adjudication time as well, like that VA example there. Erica, are you jumping in here?
No, keep going.
Okay, great. Mental health, public health resources. So this is an interesting research that actually one of my colleagues was engaged in, where he was able to identify through, in this case, social media, primarily in his case, Twitter. So he may need to change his research in the post-Musk Twitter area, but where language analysis of public social media posts was able to help him pre-identify spikes in mental health needs and mental health emergencies. So if you're at the state or county level and suddenly you're able to track, through the plugins, through the research plugins on social media, you're suddenly able to track neighborhoods or counties or cities where public health crises are likely to spike, and you've got a limited public health resource. And by the way, we all know about the mental health resource scarcity that we have nationally and in the state right now. The ability to pre-align those through use of AI is an extraordinary advantage to local governments, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I think, I'll flag the facial recognition technology here on these other slides. Many of you know that the question of use of facial recognition technology within cities is a hot button issue, especially around policing right now, and some cities have banned it. So real open question set, and that will end up being an example that I like to use for folks as they're realizing that the policy choices that we have, they're real choices. So the facial recognition technology, you could make the argument that, that there's identification of criminal behavior, alleged criminal behavior, potential criminal behavior, et cetera, on the one hand. On the other hand, you can argue that it's an invasion of privacy. That's an old argument that we've had, right? On many fronts. It's now in the AI space, and the FRT, facial recognition technology, is sort of, is one of these great examples where you draw that line is not obvious from the technology. It's a choice that we have to make as policymakers and as a democratic society about where we want those lines to be. And they're being drawn differently in different places. So, bans like here in the Bay Area, a couple cities have banned facial recognition technology. That ban goes into place, 3, 4, 5 years ago. Now the technology has advanced in many ways. Is that ban still worthwhile, or do we need to revisit it? Right?
How do we write our policies to be flexible enough to address changes in technology and evolution of that?
Exactly. I want to mention one more example on this slide, and then we'll move to wrapping up here and head to the Q&A, because it's of a different kind. It's this brainstorming example. So the second to last bullet here. Interesting use case. So right now, coming out of the federal government, there's a lot of grants, as you know, to remove highways that created segregated neighborhoods and ran through neighborhoods populated heavily by people of color in the United States, et cetera. So, neighborhood renewal projects by removing of highways. Something that's in the news, something many of you will be familiar with. You can go read more on it if you need. I'm working with, or I had a student working with me this past year who is who's using the the computer vision technologies like DALL-E, like Stable Diffusion, where you generate images out of text to create brainstorming ideas for local governments to think, if I removed this highway on this tract of land, what are some possibilities that could be that we could redesign this neighborhood? So really just brainstorming. It's not the architecture phase necessarily, although we can get to that. Their AI is working in that space too. But this idea that even the foundation model technologies that we have today can maybe help us on the creative sides, where it's less safety related, less impact related, but can just help us. Okay, 3 parks versus a park and some mixed housing, et cetera, coffee shops. Here are 20 ideas. Any of these spark inspiration on the council? Any of these spark inspiration for the architect who's working on the project? Really an unexpected and maybe interesting way to use the technology that isn't as prescriptive, but that's really in that creative brainstorming phase as well.
That's really interesting. Can you talk about, and something I don't really know. I mean, I know
Yeah.
when I'm on sort of the writing AI, it's like very rapid turnaround. With something like that, where there's brainstorming models, how quickly does it generate those ideas?
Yeah, well, I mean, so today, so it depends on the complexity, but it can be seconds. So I have a DALL-E account and Stable Diffusion account, I think, and when I put in a prompt of some kind, I can get 30 images within a minute, a minute or two. So in this case, it's a little bit more set up, right? You have to input the image with the neighborhood, et cetera, but that's fairly easy to do. And so you could write it. You could write a more specific script. You could hone, again, do some of that fine tuning I described on top of a foundation model that would really, develop this in a more robust or sophisticated way. But if you're just at the brainstorming phase, you could end up with thousands in under an hour if you wanted, if you're fast
Wow.
enough. Yeah.
Yeah. And then that does, and this is a question even in the chat that does beg the question, like, when you've got all the creativity coming from a technology solution, how do you then manage public interaction with government? How do you then get ideas from like the general public? In the same way that we think about things like art, right? We have contests for people and their skill set and their creativity. And if something's AI generated, how do you judge something that's done by a 12-year-old in their backyard versus a technology solution that's kind of perfected it from the traditional sense, from the traditional objective measures.
Yeah.
So thinking about how we engage as human beings changes dramatically, and how government engages with its citizenry or with its residents.
Yeah, I love this. And the AI and democracy. So full disclosure, one of the areas I teach in is in democracy. But the question, the question of AI and democracy is a fascinating one, where there are great examples where AI is actually helping increase the possibility for human engagement and interaction through being an automated transcriber, running ideas up across thousands of democratic local meetings, coming up with ideas, et cetera, running those up up to even the federal level. So a few experiments happening on that front that are helping. And then, as you're saying, there's also this other world in which you could inundate the public comment period, for example, with all kinds of chat. You can do that today. I mean, that's not even tomorrow problem, right? You could today use a trained chat bot to just to inundate a local official with ideas there, on your behalf. And so checks against real names. You hear the problem of deep fakes, of impersonation, of misinformation, all in that background there. So a real problem set at this moment.
Excellent.
Okay.
Keep the questions coming in the Q&A. We're about to get to that in just 1 second. He's going to wrap up very soon.
Good, great. Seth, let's go to the next slide, and then this is the last slide before wrapping up in summary. So the moment here, concern for today's leaders. So you heard Erica say, I work with leaders in corporate and civil society and in government. So one, let me just start by saying we're all dealing with one set of problems at minimum. And again, you could fill it with others here, but let's just start with something like the executive expertise problem. Right? Today's executives, the CTOs, your CIOs, they've almost all been trained in the pre-AI era. So everybody's trying to catch up. One. Two, we flagged, and you're already aware of the gold rush and the hype. There's snake oil everywhere. So how do you deal with that? We're all dealing with that. The fact that a lot of especially the narrow AIs, they rely on structured data, which is to say data that has good labeling on it, that's organized in certain ways. Unstructured data is something that AIs are getting better at dealing with in the narrow AI world, but a lot of times there's a heavy cost to structuring that. So if you want an AI that's more narrow, and your data isn't labeled as well as it might be, that could be a problem. Government, again, tends to have a lot of data and tends to be organized for various table reasons. So not always the same problem. Speed of advancement, so many unknowns there. And then what's your impact strategy? We're all trying to figure out where we're going to put, the government grant that we just got, from federal or state to apply locally. That's going to be very limited and not going to be renewable. How the heck am I going to invest, the limited 2 million, especially given the fact that it may be obsolete in 6 months? So I think that's just a flag. You're not alone in that. Everybody's looking at that together. For governments, particular concern. Now, I don't want to startle anybody, but you may know that that government and public officials are a little older, on average. A few of us with a little more gray than others.
Might have heard that before.
Exactly, and so so that exacerbates the executive concern. We all know the top talent, especially in the tech world, is siphoned off by these few large tech firms that are able to offer salaries that we just can't compete with, even at the university level. I flagged that AI on the cutting edge remains only accessible to a few companies globally. That governments, that education, the public service tech is just frankly not able to keep up at this moment. We know about sensitive data within that our government's offices hold, and then the uniquely sensitive entity that is, a government. If the government has data and is able to use it in a way that can either identify me or so on, that people seem to be far less concerned about it when Amazon's doing it to give you good recommendations on what your next purchase is versus when the government is doing it. And I think with good, for all the reasons we understand historically and good for democracy, et cetera, but governments have that extra level of sensitivity and risk mitigation to be concerned about, as you all will be well familiar. Erica, you flagged the question of technology. We're not even up to today's technology, much less this next level of AI in a lot of the governments. I don't know how much less the use of AI within a government context. I don't know how many times a week I hear from local officials, or I've heard even in the past 6 months, hey, look, pre-COVID we were still on paper and fax machines. Really COVID just got us to step one of a digital transformation, much less what AI may be able to offer. Big problem. Okay, I've already mentioned the last bullet. So second to last bullet here is the one that I will also want to flag for you all, because I think policymakers, at the legislative level, but also at the implementation level, have a real world challenge today that may not have been the case even 5-7 years ago in the AI world, or wasn't always the case, but it's becoming more and more the case. So I mentioned on foundation models, the emergent properties question, right? Where the model goes out and learns on one objective set, but then we find that it learns a bunch of other things along the way. A. B, there's also the fact that more and more AI models are engaged in what we call black box learning, where we don't know, and we're not going to be able to know how the AI is coming to its outputs, to its decisions, to its objective points. So, but in many areas, healthcare, civil rights questions, hiring decisions, we require in law understanding of explanation, understanding of how you came to a decision. If you are now using an AI system that you are, because of its black box feature, not a bug, feature, is not able to tell you why it chose to give this person credit and not that person credit, and we're having to judge that against existing civil rights laws, for example. Full disclosure, I also teach in human rights, so I'm very concerned about this. Then that's a real question set for policymakers. Where, as AI develops and we're not able to have explainability about decision making in the same way? Where are we going to continue to require explainability versus where are we going to say explainability is not maybe the best target anymore? And there's another set of questions that we ought to look at, whether it's outcomes, whether it's fairness in the general sense, whether it's safe and effective, like we do in the healthcare world. So the medical example that we often give is the Tylenol acetaminophen example. Acetaminophen been used for over 100 years. We have some theories about how it works, but we don't always know how it works. But what we think we know at this point is that it's largely safe and effective against pain, et cetera. So it's well used, it's approved for use. But the explainability of how it works or how it came to the output of reducing pain isn't there. And so we've got some examples where we've sort of allowed explainability to be set aside for a moment because of safe and effectiveness. Again, you hear hiring, big area where AI is in play. You hear credit and financial ratings, big area of concern. You hear rights concerns, big area where we always so far have been asking, how did you come to the decision? Walk us through the process there. AI may not be able to give us that or give us a credible answer, because there's some AIs that try to say how they came to the answer, but you can't trust if that's true or not. So for government and policymakers, I think this is a real question of, we're going to have to probably relook at some areas and determine, is explainability the real question, or is it something more like trustworthiness, safe, effective, fairness, et cetera, along the way? Is that going to be the new set? So there are some policy changes that this technology also represents as well.
And to your point, this ethical dilemma, and we're seeing some questions about the ethics of this in the chat.
Exactly.
We have ethics in government. We talk about it a lot. ILG teaches about it. It's like, this is a whole new area for us. And I suspect, and maybe you'll know better, that there are a lot more questions than answers right now.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, absolutely. And you hear me flagging it right here, saying, this is a big question. Where do we want to continue?
Right.
And I think that's a real discussion, which I think, so at Stanford, at the Institute for Human-Centered AI, this was a big one of our core messages, and why the university put so much resources behind that institute early on is the questions of this new age of AI. There are going to be some ethical questions, some bias questions, et cetera, that the technologies can help us with. But the real questions are those questions that we're going to have to answer about our value set and what we're going to require of the toolkit. And so here's a good example. Where do we require explainability? Another example, many of you will remember a few years ago, the question of an AI that was helping judges determine parole eligibility and had disparate treatment of white defendants versus defendants of color, and in particular Black defendants. There was a lot of bias that was encoded in the data there. And the technologist will tell us, hey, look, I can solve that problem. But there may be a slide rule in terms of what we're able to put in on the data side versus, what the outputs are. And so are you treating the data more equally? Are you throttling it in some way that's acceptable? Those are not technical questions. Those are ethical questions and values questions as leaders and policymakers and a democratic society. So a lot of the next age, technology will set some of the questions up for us, but the answers are primarily going to come, through from us, from policymakers, from society. So.
So
Okay.
before we wrap into the close, I do want to give people a heads up that we are going to answer some of the questions in the chat. And the way we're going to do it is we've talked very high level. So far, we've given some specific examples, but we're going to try and go with the ones that are really quick that we can answer very quickly. And then we're going to dive into as many of them as we can, as we possibly can before we.
Good. Good. All right, Seth, last slide here is, okay, top takeaways. So a lot of information here, et cetera. If you only remember 3 things, for local governments, it's remembering that there's an immense set of opportunities today, right now, in the narrow AI. Don't ignore them just because the headlines are all about these foundation models, et cetera. Watch the headlines, keep up with foundation models. They will be contributing very soon. I mean, Microsoft's already, indicated they're going to be folding in a lot of the technology into Microsoft Office. So we're all going to be seeing versions of it that way. But there's real opportunity for local governments in narrow AI today, hyper safe, hyper optimized. 2, you're not alone. We're all dealing with this. Government, industry, civil society, researchers, even the technologists building the technology. It's accelerating, and we're trying to identify, what's possible, what the questions are, et cetera. So please don't feel alone in this. as you go through it. And three, and this is my message both for policymakers and really for all of us thinking today about AI, that we have some real policy choices that we're going to have to make. You heard me talk about the trade-offs just a second ago that are real choices that policymakers are going to have to make, and discussions we're going to have. That to me, this moment in history bequeaths on us an extraordinarily profound sense of responsibility. So no other generation is going to be able to influence as much the early phases, early stages of AI as this generation. You in this room today are going to set guardrails that are going to influence us 7 generations down the road. The analogy here is the early nuclear policy directors, right, or policy architects. Those architects in the 1940s and 1950s, they made some early policy choices that really set the stage for the next, 50, 60 years. Not that the next 50, 60 years didn't come with innovations or changes or developments along the way. That clearly happens, but so much of the big path is cut in this early phase, and no other generation is going to have this opportunity as we live through this explosion of AI here. And it's going to touch local governments, and there really are opportunities and risks involved. And so I hope you'll join me in following the developments. I hope you'll also join me in thinking about the challenges, and realize that we have a unique sense of responsibility in our generation today, in generations today, in a way that our grandkids are going to still be feeling the impact of for some time. So I'm looking forward to the Q&A and that journey together as well.
That. So we do have the slide deck available, and in that slide deck there are literally 2 slides full of links and resources of examples and other ways that you can look at the concepts we've discussed today and how it might apply to your local agency, and even additional primer information just to give you more background and insight. I loved what you said, John, that we are at the position now, and especially the people on the line, they're practitioners in local government and know kind of the issues and the applications and the implications, and so weighing in as needed with their policymakers is key. All right, so now it's time for a fire hose, John. Get ready. I don't know if you had a chance to look at the Q&A yet, but I'm grateful to all of you that have dropped in things. I've tried to sprinkle in a couple of notes, and I think you guys have covered many, many things, and I asked a few of these questions in here already. A quick one for you.
Yeah.
Questions, well, relatively quick one. We've talked about job displacement, right? We're going to have some positions are not going to exist anymore. How do we prepare our employees? How do we prepare our communities for the workforce development implications of what could become a pretty invasive and challenging issue?
Yeah, good. So a couple high-level notes here. First of all, I think a very legitimate concern on the replacement question. So I grew up on a family farm. We had tractors. Those tractors replaced many, farm workers that would have been on the farm 50, 60 years prior. The new technology displaced certain types of workers, yes. On the other end of the spectrum, the canonical story around bank tellers here. ATMs come out, online banking comes out. Everybody's worried bank tellers are going to, disappear. Today, there are more bank tellers than there were at the onset of automated banking, because the role or the tasks involved in what a bank teller does.
Uh-oh. Did we lose him?
I will note that John has paused for me as well.
Oh, bummer. Okay, he was just getting good. Here he is. He's maybe coming back. We're going to ask him to turn his video off when he comes on. Hey, John, are you back?
Yeah, I'm back.
Maybe turn your video off. It looks like your internet might have frozen a little bit. We love to see you, but maybe turn the video off just to make sure you keep that bandwidth.
Okay, great. What was the last thing you heard?
So the jobs have changed. So you kind of cut off right in the middle of that sentence.
Good. Okay. So the jobs have changed. So the example I gave on the one end was, tractor, new technology replacing a bunch of workers. On the other end, the bank tellers, new technology, ATMs, online banking actually changed the way those jobs occur. And today, are carried out, and today there are more bank tellers than there were at the onset of those new technologies taking hold. So right now there's an enormous amount of research by economists to try and flag which jobs are more likely to be replaced and which jobs are more likely to grow. And then the third category, and this is really where we expect the most development to happen. What jobs are those that are going to continue but be supplemented or complemented by the new AI technologies? So in radiology, here's the traditional example. Radiology, if you look at the number of tasks, and we've had some researchers out of MIT and elsewhere do this, and I give you one resource in the slide, one congressional report on this from Eric Byrne-Jolfvenson in the resources section there. So you'll be able to read more into this if you want. What we find is, say for radiologists, there's about 20 plus or minus tasks that they do in a given on a given report. A. B. AI is able to replace maybe half of them, right? So the other half, we don't think AI is going to be great at replacing. So in the radiologist case, the question, the line we give here is, AI is not likely to replace radiologists. Rather, radiologists who use AI are likely to replace radiologists that don't use AI. And so for workplace, I give you some resources to look into if you want to. If I'm a local official, I'm definitely trying to assess where my local economy, is heaviest in terms of the types of jobs and where those jobs fall along the spectrum of more likely to be replaced versus less likely to be replaced. But by and large, I think we have every reason to expect that the complementarity of AI and humans and AIs working together is where we're going to see the most benefit and the most likely outcomes here. And then again, I think the productivity question is a real live question. Many of us, look, I mentioned the gray hair that I and others have right now, have lived through at least two revolutions, right? We lived through the online revolution and the smartphone revolution. And we might have expected a huge productivity gain, on the one hand, and we are able to do a lot of things better and more quickly on the one hand, but on the other hand, we also see a distraction piece. And so exactly. And so the productivity question is also in play here, where there's not just the types of jobs and the use of AI that's likely to be impacted across a wide range, A, but B, thinking about productivity, it may not be that AI generates a huge amount of productivity in the same way that we saw online and the internet have a mixed bag as well. And so I think be cognizant of those two things. Don't be overly optimistic on the productivity side, and then do your homework in terms of your local economy, your local jobs, on the replacement versus supplement versus giving us more work to do. Yeah.
We also think holistically about it from a workforce development standpoint across your community, because it's about education and training, not only of your current staff, but also of the future, right? The future public sector workforce and others, and making sure that our education systems are prepared to teach about these things. Given that this gray hairs of ours, we're not made, our generation didn't learn it. We're learning it now. So how do we make sure that the next generation's also understanding it? Along those lines, we've got a question about the risk to government agencies from AI-generated network attacks and cybersecurity. Yeah. That's a big one. Have you heard anything quickly about that and how to prevent it?
Yeah. Yes. Well, look, cybersecurity for local governments, again, I don't need to sit down, everybody. I don't need to tell you all. Cybersecurity is already a major concern for local governments, given the limited budgets, given the limited resources, et cetera. So, I'm particularly concerned about this. I think it's a real concern to have. I think you and your technology team need to be assessing, your risk here. Look, I don't know how we get around not relying on companies for some of our cybersecurity in a real heavy way, and trust that the big players are already, having to deal with this themselves. The Googles, the Amazons, the other security firms that are, the big names that we know, and the other security firms that your technology teams will know. It's a wild world out there, but you cannot afford to go you cannot afford to ignore cybersecurity, and you can't probably afford to go cheap if I'm in the seat, making these decisions. It would be one of my top concerns because it's so easy and because local governments are so vulnerable.
Awesome. Thank you. Around the issue of security, we've got a question about medical data with mental health. Can AI protect medical data?
Yeah, what an excellent question. Okay, so some of you may know, some of the audience may have seen headlines around the real challenges of maintaining privacy in medical data. For example, there's a researcher, I think they were at Harvard, but there was a researcher who was able, through pretty basic means, really able to identify the governor's medical records in a purportedly anonymized data set of medical data. So, that's one example that made the news. So this, researcher then, downloads the data. It's supposed to be anonymous, have privacy contained. They took all the precautions. She quickly breaks the code, finds out, and not even breaks the code, just through a couple of simple identification methods, identifies the governor's records, mails it to him, and says, "Hey, we need to do better." AI. So, all right, you get a few stories like that. That's actually a real problem across all kinds of data, not just medical data. It turns out to be quite easy to identify an individual person. That's challenging, right? But look, I got a funny Cajun name. Good luck. You find Robichaux in the Bay Area. You're going to be able to find me within probably 3 clicks, right? Pretty easily. Even if I weren't a public figure, just those types of things already are in play. What then is going on right now? There's a ton of research to exactly do this, to try and find ways to further anonymize, protect privacy, 1. 2, ways to responsibly, and while keeping the fidelity to the usefulness of the data, create or synthesize artificial data, synthetic data that would look and function for all needed purposes, research, drug testing, and the like, that would look like the data set that you would traditionally engage in your research around. So whether it's creating a new medicine, whether it's deploying your mental health resources and the like, but that would de-anonymize in some way. So this is an active area of research. You will find that there will be many people who will tell you they have cracked that code. I'm not going to stand by any one of them at this moment. As well, but I would say that's something that if anybody's telling you they've cracked that code, really have your technology team look really hard at. But definitely an area of research and something that we care a lot about, because it will have an enormous amount of impact across a wide range of factors, not just the sensitive areas like medicine, like health, like education, and the like.
One other question that we're getting a lot about is Public Records Act. So we get a lot of requests for public requests, and there's a couple different buckets of questions in our Q&A. One is around, is there an opportunity for AI to support and do this? I mean, there's a lot of subjectivity around Public Records Acts, and I don't think you're an attorney, but if you have legal background, let me know. But there's also the opportunity for people to kind of not be able to distinguish between real information and misinformation. Public record. So Public Records Acts, local government, they spend a ton of time on it already. AI, good, bad. How does AI play into this? Is the general.
Yeah, so I think this is a great example of where.
And is something already available to help with it?
Okay, so I'm not going to know that one, but what I will tell you is that there's a good opportunity here, and I think this is a great example of where AI sitting next to a competent individual, a subject matter expert on public records, we will be able to see a lot of benefits. So, if AI can do an initial analysis of the records, can do an initial pull of suggested records that will then be reviewed and audited by the human expert, that seems to me both a reasonable use case and an opportunity where I in the seat, where I'm managing the team, to be looking at, okay, look, AI can really cut out some of the grunt work here for us. Now, usual caveats. Make sure you are, you have the right contract in place so that anything that's the AI is looking at is not going to be shipped back to the company, or the company doesn't have access to, that's firewalled off, et cetera, so that things that are not intended to be released to the public don't even get to the company, because I'd be concerned about that. So, using an off-the-shelf product often, can be challenging for governments. And so, the big players on the foundation models world are looking for government plugins that will be more walled off from privacy. But I think today you can see an opportunity in that space. And then my additional reminder to always be thinking about how your data is being transferred, who has access to it. And I would have an additional layer today to make sure that that the company doesn't get to pull what's supposed to be privately held records.
So sort of coming soon. One more question about this general topic of information, maybe misinformation. Some people have been testing the systems that they've seen, and they've asked for citations, and the citations have come back with erroneous records.
Yes.
Right. How can local governments use these systems, maybe even internally, with some level of certainty around the kind of information that's being generated and whether it's credible or not?
Yeah, good. So this is already a major problem that all of the ChatGPT and equivalents are looking at. The companies are all looking at right now, is to improve the citations. I think the New York Times did an article recently where I did a project recently where they inputted and asked for sources citing prior New York Times articles. Turns out those were all the citations were not accurate. They were not made up. They were fictional, or they were made up. They were fictional. So one, you should be aware that happens right now. There's a lot of errors. I would never use anything from ChatGPT without running it through an expert and getting it properly reviewed. A. B, the firms know about the problem. They're working on the problem. And C, it's that fine tuning that I described over foundation models right now that is, that I would expect in the next year or two, you're going to start to see companies trying to sell you as local governments on the possibility that their product, their model has been fine-tuned around governments to better cite. And frankly, we need that. Look, one of the huge opportunities here, not just for governments, but education, something that local governments often, are working in, a fair amount, of course, in the United States, is that citation question, and that question of the ability to really transform research, not only our internal research, but across libraries and digital archives and the like. Once that gets solved, and I would expect that to be, you hear me saying that they're working on it now. Once that gets solved, say in the next couple of years, if that happens, I would say that unlocks an enormous potential for all of us. And exactly this type of example is a great one.
I love that. Okay, last question. Just in the interest of time, John, let's go back high level again. Are there any conversations happening right now at your level or across the globe around developing some kind of ethical code, right? Hippocratic oath of types connected to this? Because as you mentioned, just not unlike, the nuclear discussion, it's not unlike some of these other very large ethical and values-based kind of decisions we need to make.
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, when Stanford, decided to launch the Institute for Human-Centered AI, the ethics question was at the core of it, so 5 years ago. And a couple points here to make. What the AI folks will tell me is, hey, look, we all joined this field. So the AI experts say, joined the field 20 years ago. We all joined this field when it was an esoteric little, we loved math statistics thing. And now suddenly, look, the past 15 years, it's been, the whole earth has shifted around them. And it's now an enormous field with profound impacts on society and daily life. So one, they use that to say, remember, we're kind of a young field. We're not like medicine, which has had the Hippocratic Oath for centuries, right? Where there's a real robust canon around medical ethics, and the quite hard questions have been dealt with for centuries. At this point, relative to, say, medicine, AI ethics, much more recent, much more nascent in its thinking and so on. So yes, so first of all, just set that context up. Secondly, it's moving too fast. You better get something in place, right? Immediately, right?
Right. So go ahead.
So I'll mention three types of examples that folks are thinking about quickly. One, they're going to be the preferences and values and ethical standards set up, inculcated in law and policy. So you all in the room, Congress, state level, there's going to be a great deal of that happening already. I gave you an example of a British national AI strategy question for local governments in the resources. We all know the EU is working on that. We all know Sacramento is working on something. So there are legislative answers, but I'll give you two other answers that we're hearing folks think about in the field. One is analogous to the launch of electricity. So when electricity launched, there was a real concern around safety. And so UL became a third-party entity which certified a given light bulb or product was safe electronically. And that became sort of a seal of approval for safety. UL actually is today looking to say, hey, would we be able to do something like that around AI to certify that this is safe or effective or whatever. So one example is a third party sort of, marking or giving, a seal of approval certification that something's safe and effective. That's a model that exists, electricity and elsewhere. We could be heading down that road. So there are advocates on that front. The third one, and this is maybe where I'll close here on this question, is a really professional ethics standard. So when CRISPR, when the CRISPR technology, the gene editing technology came out, there was a real sense of those working on this technology that you could not allow for humans to be grown with edited genes, right? We all know that you may remember that the Chinese scientists, then did that. That Chinese scientist not only ended up in jail, he's out now, as you may have seen in the news recently, but also that Chinese scientist was unable to publish or participate in the activities of the field. So the field sort of made him an outcast or a pariah. And so a self-policing mechanism there. We probably need each of those things, all three, something at the legislative level, some third-party certifications in some places, and then, a real set of professional ethics around the profession, like medical ethics, like lawyers, et cetera, that will police. And we've got advocates here in California and around the world in each of those areas, leading voices, leading ethicists who are advocating each of those. I'm probably in the camp of there's probably a mix that's needed in the end. But let me tell you, there is no AI conference I've been to in the past 3 years that doesn't have ethics at its core concern. I ran some of the largest events in Stanford's history, 150 sessions in one case. I don't think there was a single one that didn't mention ethics in it.
That is great to know. And I just want to thank you so much for all of the insight and the context, and certainly the thorough answers to these questions. I think the general gist is there's a lot of change happening in this space, and it's evolving very, very quickly. But you've certainly got your kind of ear to the pulse of it, and that we continue to pay a role and attention to what's happening, weigh in on the implications for our business, and certainly start to prepare our communities, start to prepare our employees and ourselves for what this might look like, a world with using this technology in concert, maybe in coordination, and as a complement to the work that we're already doing. So maybe our jobs don't go away, but they definitely change. And this has been so helpful. I want to acknowledge there's about 4 or 5 questions in the chat that I didn't get to that I think might be easy answers. And if we have the opportunity, we will include those answers in the follow-up note that we send to everybody that registered for this session. And it's just a couple quick things that we might be able to drop your way, so we didn't forget about you. I just want to thank everyone for your participation, your engagement. It was a fantastic session. John, you were absolutely amazing. As you can see on the screen, the recording will be available soon. We will share this recording and certainly the slide deck with everyone, and we'll make it available on our website and on our social pages. And if you have not already joined our website, and if you haven't joined our newsletter, if you haven't joined our social handles, we encourage you to do that. We're going to try and stay on top of this because it certainly connects to the ethics and the work that we do from a leadership standpoint, a governance standpoint, engagement, all of the things. And we see a huge implications for local government in this. And we're so grateful you were interested as much as we were. And with that, I want to thank not only all of you for joining, but also, of course, John Robichaux. Thank you so much. And if you are able to get back on there you are. It's great to see you. Happy to have you just be kind of available and communicate with us about all you've learned, all you are doing, and just the amazing work that's happening in this space, transformational work that's happening in artificial intelligence and how it could apply to local government. So with that, thank you on behalf of ILG. Certainly all of you, if you have additional questions, we encourage you to reach out. Our contact information is listed here on the screen. And with that, have a great rest of your day, great rest of your week, and a fantastic summer.
Thank you, everybody.